drop. Welcome back to the Go Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Neander, back again with you for another great episode. Well, thanks for joining us here. So, let's see, what are we doing today? We're going to continue on with our NFC Divisional Preview Series. We've already finished with the NFC West, and we're going to be moving on to the NFC North today. Lots of questions in the North. Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers did not get the weapons we hoped he would get in the offseason. So how does that affect him? They drafted a running back. How does that affect A.J. Dillon? We'll see. Over in Minnesota, of course, Stephon Diggs is gone. Adam Thielen, health questions. We don't know what's going to happen there. Chicago and Detroit still struggling to improve as a team. Both of them there. There's a lot of question marks on the offensive side as far as their fantasy relevant pieces. And if there are many, who are they? And where are they valued, honestly? Because right now it's all about draft value and ADP. If you're a seasoned fantasy football vet, you know that anybody can be a decent fantasy football pick. It just depends on where in the draft you get them and, if you play them during the right weeks. So we'll be breaking down all those matchups. We do have another friend of the show coming back on to help us out, my buddy Gage Scott. He was on, if you watched our AFC preview series, he was with us for the AFC South and helped us get ready for that division. So we're going to go ahead and move him geographically around the country, move him up to the northern end here for the NFC North, and we're going to bring him in right now and enjoy. All right, there he is, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Gage Scott. Gage, how's it going?
Doing great, man. How's it going?
Doing pretty well. Thanks again for coming back on and helping us out. So the last time you guys saw Gage, he was doing the AFC South with us, I believe. And this time he's going to be helping us out with the NFC North. That may be a little more interesting division than the South. Not quite as hard to mine for talent there. So, of course, the NFC North brings us first to the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Packers were a pretty big season in the offseason because the assumption was they were going to get Rodgers some weapons this year, right? The big problem was outside of Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones last year, there wasn't much to go to, and they just didn't do anything, right? Instead of getting him more help, they actually created kind of a problem by drafting Jordan Love. They moved up, and that's going to create drama. Then they got a second-round running back, A.J. Dillon, already a very good backfield. So a lot of rather questionable moves in the draft. The only receiver they brought in was Devin Funchess. And, with the exit of Geronimo Allison, you can kind of consider that maybe a wash. So, we're looking at Aaron Rodgers basically going into this season with essentially the same cast of skill players he went into last season with. And that brought him to the number 10 finish last year, played all 16 games. Another 4,000-yard season where he took care of the ball really well, 26 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. The question is, with this same cast of characters, can he get the stats back up to that, range where he was considered one of the top 5 quarterbacks? Or is this the Aaron Rodgers we're looking at right now, number 10 or below, quarterback?
I think we're looking at 10 or below. All signs are pointing towards being a more run-heavy offense. Even the tight end they drafted was more of a blocker to help offensive line and Aaron Jones. He was ultra efficient with the ball. Loved the ratio of 26-4 interceptions. But even with the relationship with his coach and him being drafted by Jordan Love, I don't see it. I don't see him going any further than top 10 this year, even though he is efficient with the ball. But it's somebody I'd probably steer away from this year for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because for me, I see the narrative of, he's angry, right? So he wants to come out and show, hey, I'm not ready. I'm not done, right? I mean, I'm still Aaron freaking Rodgers. So what were you thinking? I'm going to show you up this year. I'm going to get my way out of Green Bay and really stick it to you when I go somewhere else. But I just don't think he has the weapons to have that kind of season. That's the problem here. So still has the same backfield. Aaron Jones, amazing season last year. Number 2 running back overall in 16 games, heavily on the back of his touchdown ratio. He had 19 total touchdowns, and it's very hard to sustain that. So if the assumption is the workload will stay pretty similar, but the touchdown regression is coming, where does Aaron Jones fall to you? Is he still an RB1? Is he, kind of on that cusp? What are you thinking to start the season?
I still see him as an RB1, but like I said, maybe falling back more towards the latter end. Again, 19 touchdowns. I don't see that happening again. But I mean, with the newer offensive scheme leaning more towards a running aspects, I mean, he's still probably going to be up in that conversation with the RB1 for sure. He's definitely a talented back, and I think we're not done seeing what he can do for sure.
Yeah, I mean, got the Jamal Williams vulture aspect in there. You had 6 touchdowns total last year. Now you bring in a second round, a pretty high draft capital pick in A.J. Dillon. I'm just worried about Aaron Jones and this season. I really think that it's going to be a struggle for him to be an RB1. And I know for sure, looking at my construction of teams, I don't want him as my RB1, even if it's my number 2 pick, on my team. I just can't go into the season with him as my RB1. And this is a guy I rode to a championship last year. So love you, Aaron Jones. Just, I don't love the way Green Bay's front office is handling things right now. It definitely concerns me. Do you think A.J. Dillon will come in and take over that number 2 role and get some decent amount of work? Or is he just basically for the future, after this year?
I think it's more of a future pick. I mean, I think they like Jamal Williams as more of a pass catching back too, as the 1B to Aaron Jones. His role in this offense this year, I don't think is that significant, but it is concerning that it could cut into more of Aaron Jones's work. But again, I think they're leaning more towards a run offense, very similar to maybe the San Francisco 49ers, just having 3 backs that are just plowing it down to you all the time. So I still like Aaron Jones up at the top, but like I said, maybe towards the latter end. I wouldn't really be happy with him even the second pick as my RB1. But yeah, if he's there, he's there.
It's about roster construction and, what guys you feel good about having as either number 1 or number 2, who you already have drafted. And yeah, Jones right now is being drafted as the RB11, and I'll have to pass on him at that number right now. Move out to wideout here. Devontae Adams, the obvious number 1 in this offense and one of the top receivers in the league. Only played 12 games last year, but still approached 1,000 yards. Any reason to take him out of the top 5 wide receivers in the league?
Not at all. He's still the main weapon for Aaron Rodgers. Even if it does go more towards the running offense, it's still Devontae Adams. I mean, even though he hasn't played a full season in 3 years, I mean, you can't deny it's Devontae Adams. 127 targets still. I mean, he was on pace to break over 1,300 yards again. So he's one of the more reliable, just solid targets out there. And I see him being up farther in the tier 1. I mean,
I'm going to have him above DeAndre Hopkins. We talked about Hopkins in the last episode in the NFC West and why I think he's going to come down a little bit. And I do think I'll have Devontae Adams as more than likely my number 3 receiver on the board there, with Julio as number 2 behind Michael Thomas. But I do think it's interesting with Devontae Adams, a couple of games where he took over last year, he was an absolute animal. And you got to see what he really can do. If he's the focal point of an offense that's working pretty well, he was an absolute beast. So I still like him in that range. I'm really hoping I'm not drafting anywhere in 6 to 9 is where I don't want to draft this year, where a lot of years I do want to draft in that range. I just see a lot of pitfalls in those ADP ranges for some of these guys. So let's go past Devontae Adams and talk about number 2, because I think there's no doubt that the number 2 option for Aaron Rodgers can be a very valuable thing if it works out the right way. So, we have Allen Lazard, who was the number 2 on the team last year, but frankly, that was only good for number 68 in the league. So, there had to be a lot of improvement to be a valuable piece. They added Devin Funchess, from the free agent pool. Then they still have Marcus Valdez-Scantling. They did let Geronimo Allison and his 55 targets go, so he's out of the mix. So I guess the question is Allen Lazard definitely the number 2 in your eyes? And what is that worth in the Green Bay offense? Is that worth a wide receiver 3, kind of a pick?
He's definitely valuable in the offense. I mean, we saw what Lazard can do when Adams went down. He had a couple games where he really looked like he could be a contender for a decent pick. Maybe latter end of wide receiver 3. Again, I think it's going to be a more run-heavy offense, but at the end of the day, there's only 2 targets, and if they're number 1 and 2, and you got somebody like Aaron Rodgers, I mean, worth a later round flyer for sure.
Yep. Yeah, he's way down there right now. Right now, he's the 67th wide receiver off the board, which basically means he's free. You can draft him whenever you want.
Right.
He's right now he's below Denzel Mims in ADP, right? Guys like D.D. Westbrook, which is pretty crazy to me, considering the possible ceiling that you could have here with Lazard. If his ADP stays there, I'll be targeting him as a late round guy for sure. Devin Funchess, any interest, or you think he's just a guy that was added? Yeah. And let's go to tight end quickly. Jimmy Graham and his 60 targets are gone. So you still have Jay Sternberger, who was drafted last year, missed most of the year. Mercedes Lewis still hanging on in the tight end room as the number 2, you assume. Now, with 60 vacated targets and the young guy, Jay Sternberger, is Sternberger a sneaky guy in the back end of the tight end pool, or is that a strictly wait and see?
No, I think it's even worse than a strictly wait and see. I mean, because you still have, they drafted Josiah Deguara, and even though he's more of a blocking tight end, you still have Mercedes Lewis waiting there. And anytime you get the three tight end set, I mean, that's just stay away for sure. But wouldn't have any interest in any of these guys this year. But
and for me, I think the big thing is that I'm looking at him in a little bit because they didn't add other weapons. Had they added that big second wide receiver weapon, I'd be thinking that, you know, the targets might dry up a little bit for the tight end. But I see no reason to think that he can't get above 50 or 60 targets. And it's funny because it sounds terrible, but the way tight ends roll, it's like, yeah, the top guy's getting 120-something targets. But then after number 8 or so, number 9, it just that muck and mire that you fall into, a lot of these guys are 40 to 50 catch guys in that range. So I don't see any reason why he can't get there, but I'm not going to bet on it, you know? All right, let's move away from Green Bay. We're going to go up to Minnesota. Minnesota's my bet to win this division this year. Not that it matters for fantasy, but I like this team this year. They brought in Gary Kubiak. I like that move as an offensive coordinator. I just really feel like he connects a lot with young players, and they have a few, you know, young draft picks. I think that he'll be good for. You know, they let a lot of targets go. Stephon Diggs, of course, was unhappy last year, but that's 94 targets. Laquan Treadwell, it's another 16 targets, 110 wide receiver targets are gone. We're going to see who's going to fill those. Let's start with Kirk Cousins, though. Very workmanlike season. Had some good games down the stretch. Started awfully and then started picking it up, you know, close to the halfway point of the season. I think most people look at him as just a week-to-week streamable guy for injuries and bye weeks. Any reason to think he's going to elevate this year past that? Or, you know, still going to be in that same category for Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, I think he falls in the category of the streamer. Even though this was first time in 5 years he hasn't thrown for 4,000 yards, that was mainly the blame for the emergence of Dalvin Cook for sure. I see him more as a game manager, and I think he's happy with that role. I don't see him progressing any farther than that. But he's definitely ultra efficient as a streamer. I mean, he's had 26-6 ratio for touchdowns and interceptions. So not a bad choice for a streamer, but I don't see him going anywhere farther than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's weeks I like those streamers, right? You know, if I love the rest of my team, I feel like I'm going to score some points even without my quarterback, and I'd rather have the 14 instead of maybe 3 or maybe 25. Yeah, I like playing a guy like Cousins. All depends on what the rest of my team is doing.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at his weapons here. So you mentioned Dalvin Cook, one of the top running backs in the game last year, finishes number 5 in only 14 games. Found the end zone a bunch, 1,135 yards, 13 touchdowns on the ground. Was also very valuable as a receiver. 53 receptions on 63 targets, 500 yards plus. Didn't get into the end zone, but you got to assume that'll break if he gets that many targets again. The question here is, have we already seen the ceiling for Dalvin Cook? Was this year possibly the best you're going to get from him, or do you think he can maintain this top 5, you know, performance?
It could be. I mean, he hasn't been healthy since he started. He hasn't played a full season since he started in the league. If he can stay healthy for 16 games, we might not have seen a ceiling. And like you said, 519 yards on 53 receptions and no touchdowns, that's probably going to change. You're going to find the end zone at least a couple more times. But, I mean, we don't know his injury history. I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen. And he's kind of the key cog for the offense right now. And if he goes down, I mean, that only adds value to every single other person in Minnesota. So it all kind of rides on him. He's more than capable of doing it for sure, but it's a big question mark.
And there's always questions, in, you know, as far as draft ADP goes, and there's always difficult, you know, decisions to make. For me, this section of running backs, right, the top 3, I think most people have McCaffrey, Barkley, Elliott, you know, one way or another. A lot of people do, not everybody. Some people have Cook or Kamara in there, but a lot of people have those as the number 3. For me, this next series of Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb are extremely unsettling to me when I'm in the first round and this is going to be my first pick. If I'm looking at those guys, I very well might jump over to Michael Thomas or Julio Jones. But are any of those guys I mentioned, I don't want to have Dalvin Cook as high as number 4, but I don't think I can put Kamara, Henry, Mixon, or Chubb ahead of him. So what are you thinking there?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, 2 years ago, I was said Alvin Kamara for sure, but kind of had a little bit of regression last year. Mixon, Henry, like I said, the receptions aren't there for Henry, and Mixon just plays for a bad team. I kind of agree with you in the fact that I'm normally running back heavy first round, but if I'm selecting 6 or 7, man, this might be one of the first years where I just go, oh, shit, I got to draft a wide receiver. So it's such a weird realm of the 4 to 7 running backs that you just don't know what's going to happen. So anything outside of that, I mean, it could be anybody. I mean, Dalvin Cook could jump to number 2. We have no idea, but.
So let me ask you about Alexander Madison now. This is Dalvin Cook's backup, second year in the league, and was considered, last year and probably again this year as one of the most, if not the most valuable handcuff that you can have. I guess the real question is, aside from being a handcuff, if you think they're going to be running the ball a little bit more this year, is there a chance Madison is one of the few RB2s in the league with standalone value, or is it based on Dalvin Cook's health?
Still based on Dalvin Cook's health, I think. But if it's later rounds in the draft, and if I'm betting on Dalvin Cook's health, which I am, I don't think he's going to stay healthy a full season because he hasn't yet. And it might be one of those things where you just take him just so nobody else can. If he's there available, I'd probably take him because we've seen what he can do. He's not a bad back at all. I mean, yeah, I didn't write it down, but he had like 5.5 yards a carry or something. I mean, he's really good.
Yeah, he looked good. He was highly touted out of college, and that's why they drafted him. They didn't know if Cook was going to stay healthy, right? He had his healthiest year last year, but until then, up until then, he hadn't really had even close to a full season. So, Madison, I think, is the most valuable handcuff in the game. For me, if you draft Dalvin Cook in the first round, you have got to, when it comes to that 6th, 7th round, it might feel like a wasted pick, but it won't be if Cook goes down. I mean, again, because you lose that guy, and then whoever else has Madison now gains possibly a league winner, by putting him in week 8, 9, 10, or whatever it is. So, I think you got to draft him if you have Cook, but other than that, you don't draft him for me. Let's go outside here. The biggest story, Diggs gone, as I mentioned, as well as to a lesser extent, Laquan Treadwell, 110 vacated targets. So we have Adam Thielen as the assumptive, number 1 option in the offense. Now we have Justin Jefferson, their first-round draft pick out of LSU. A lot of people thought this might have been the perfect landing spot for Justin Jefferson, and he goes there. So, we see a lot of receivers sometimes go to these tough situations where we think it's not a good fit. It's nice to see a guy go somewhere where a lot of people thought it was a perfect fit. The opening is there with Diggs gone. There's no clear-cut contender for number 2. You've got Tajay Sharp, who they got from Tennessee. You've got B.C. Johnson, and really nobody else. So is there any reason to think that Justin Jefferson is not the number 2 on this team? And what value does that have before we talk about Thielen?
He's definitely number 2, but the number 2 in Minnesota is kind of hit or miss for me, especially if it's a rookie. Even if it was a veteran, I'd still say the number 2 spot in Minnesota is going to be kind of lesser value. Justin Jefferson had a great season last year. I think the only receiver that had better numbers than he did was actually his teammate, Jamar Chase. So we know he can do it, but I'm going to bat for Thielen this year for sure. I mean, with Stephon Diggs gone, even if Justin Jefferson cuts into his targets, I mean, you mentioned Stephon Diggs had 94 targets last year, but the year before he had 149. That's a huge number. And if Thielen can stay healthy, I mean, he could launch way up into the rankings.
All right, so let's just say Justin Jefferson pulls 80 targets this year. Is that somebody, if you felt like that was a number he was going to get, is that draftable in the later round? Because for me, I see a clear-cut path to him being very, very used in this offense like DK Metcalf was last year. And I don't want to miss this pick. This pick seems to me like one of those important ones where the opportunity is there, the talent is there, everything is there, and there's nobody to stop him. So I'm in love with Justin Jefferson as a sneaky, pick in that 8th round, and you definitely get him there. I mean, I don't think he's going to crawl up before that. So I know you love Thielen. Let's talk about his possibilities. He played in 10 games last year, but we know They weren't 10 full games. He was injured in a lot of them. Came in, came out. He was trying to work through it, but really couldn't. If he is in line for 125 plus targets, it's hard to imagine him not being a wide receiver one. I assume that's where you have him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even with Justin Jefferson as a sneaky pick in the later rounds, he's not proven yet. And we've seen some great rookie receivers come through, like you said, DK Metcalf, DJ Chark, AJ Brown. We've seen what rookie receivers can do, but again, their first years aren't typically blow-up years, especially when you have somebody like Thielen that they trust in that organization and they love throwing to, and in a run-heavy offense. So, I mean, Thielen, for me, is going to be catapulting towards the top of wide receiver one this year.
So I want to bring up a few wide receivers that are just ahead of Adam Thielen in current ADP, and just a quick yes or no if you would draft Adam Thielen or this guy. So you just tell me which one. So Adam Thielen or Cooper Kupp?
Adam Thielen.
Adam Thielen or Juju Smith-Schuster?
Adam Thielen.
Adam Thielen or Amari Cooper? That was tough.
Ooh. Adam Thielen still. Amari Cooper is a roller coaster of emotions, and he's always been that way.
All right, so word to the wise, if any of you are in a league with Gage this year, draft Adam Thielen and then blackmail the shit out of him in a trade for him, all right? Just make sure you...
He is the middle of the third round. Like, yes, I'm taking him there.
Yeah, if his ADP stays there, and he's my number 2 wide receiver or my number 1 with 2 top backs, yeah, I feel all right about that. I think you're going to have to get him in the second round. I don't know. We'll see. All right, let's go to tight end quick before we move on. Kyle Rudolph, the number 14 tight end somehow on 48 targets, 39 receptions, 367 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And that's what I mean, right? After number 8, tight end, it's a slog of guys with 400-something yards and a couple of TDs. So I was all in on Irv Smith, assuming I thought they were going to get rid of Kyle Rudolph this year. I really thought he showed enough that it made sense to make him the focal point tight end in the offense. So I was ready to anoint him into one of my guy sleepers for the year if Rudolph was gone. Rudolph's not gone. So now it's over. I am now swiping left on Irv Smith and moving away from this relationship. I guess the bigger question is, do you still think Kyle Rudolph is, if there's one to own, is it Rudolph, and is it any more than a streamer?
If there was one to own, I think it'd still be Rudolph just for the 6 touchdowns, and he's more of the end zone guy. Whether or not you can call those when it's going to happen, I mean, you can't. But with Irv Smith coming up and cutting into those targets, I still think Kyle Rudolph is the 1A to the 1B, just because he's been healthy for 5 seasons and they kind of feel like they can trust him there. But neither one of these guys to me is going to be anyone I'm chasing, just because they kind of split between them. I mean, the receptions were almost identical last year. Irv Smith had 36, Kyle Rudolph had 39. Their yards were almost identical. The only thing, Kyle Rudolph had a couple more touchdowns. So I still feel like they're going to look for him in the end zone, but with Irv cutting into it, I just don't trust it.
Yeah, I think it was one of the biggest missed opportunities of the offseason there. I was really, really high on Smith making a big move this year. Still a little salty about it, but I'll get over it. All right, so that's going to take us to Chicago. Man, another team that won maybe the offseason drama competition this year. There's a lot of questionable moves, a lot of new faces and new places. So we'll start going through all that. They were near the back of the league in most offensive categories, leading to them bringing in 2 new offensive coordinators. This is a new trend I don't understand. They brought in Bill Lazor as the offensive coordinator and Dave Ragone as the passing game coordinator. All right, I don't think you could bring in 12 coordinators for Mitchell Trubisky. It's not going to fucking help, right? I mean, that's how I look at it. So I was not surprised at all they grabbed Nick Foles. I thought it was going to be Cam Newton, honestly, going to Chicago. But I see why they grabbed Foles. It makes sense. As long as they were able to get him to restructure his contract, which he did, then it makes sense, right? You don't have to pay anywhere near for him that you'd have to pay for Cam, assuming he restructured. So it made sense. I seem to be in the minority. I think week 1 or maybe by week 3 or 4, the latest, Nick Foles is the quarterback. I think if they had a full preseason and training camp, that Nick Foles would be the quarterback. We talked about it before. You think Trubisky's going to be the quarterback on week 1? So you think he has a chance to make any progress? We know we're not playing him in fantasy football, but just generally, you think he can make some progress and keep his job this year?
I don't know. I mean, Trubisky, I still think he's going to start week 1 for sure, just because I don't think they would admit that they made that big of a mistake where they drafted him. I mean, there was people after him in the draft like Deshaun Watson. I mean, they just don't want to admit that they passed up on somebody that they could use. But I think by mid-season, Foles is going to be the starter for sure. Trubisky's going to mess up. His quarterback rating last year was 39.5. Like, that is god-awful. And being more of a defensive team, I think they want to try to put a little spark on the offense. Even if Foles isn't that much of an upgrade from Trubisky, which I think is a little bit of an upgrade, Foles isn't like an elite quarterback by any means, but I think they're just going to try to throw something on the fire and see what happens.
The theory is if your defense is that good, which you hope it is, and it should be pretty good, you shouldn't have to improve all that much on offense to improve your team. They still were 8-8 somehow last year, mostly on the back of defense. So if you can get a little bit better, you could be a team that competes for a wild card at 9-7 or maybe 10-6. I just don't see it happening with Trubisky. 17 touchdowns in 15 games. You just got to be able to find. I mean, there was that one game 2 years ago. He had like 6 touchdowns, and I think people thought that was the turning point.
Yeah, it was on that game.
Isn't that always the story? But I don't see it happening. So I'm moving past them until I see Foles, and then even then I got to wait to see. Well, let's talk about the running backs here. They didn't make any changes here. You got David Montgomery as the clear-cut, first and second down, rusher. And then you still have Tariq Cohen coming in as the, passing down back, third down back, whatever you have. The numbers bear that out. 242 carries for Montgomery, 64 for Cohen, but 35 targets for Montgomery, 104 targets for Tariq Cohen. So it seems like their roles are very clearly, delineated here, and we know what to expect. David Montgomery didn't look great, under 4 yards a carry. You never like to see that. But there are not many running backs that get 240-plus carries a season anymore. So just the volume alone, even if he's as bad as he was last year, he was the number 25 running back, and you have to assume you can't get worse with 242 carries, right? You have to get better a little bit. So what's your temperature on David Montgomery? Is it only about draft value, or do you have any strong feelings about him this year?
I think draft value for sure. He had 7 touchdowns overall, which, again, you mentioned his yards per carry weren't that great. But with Cohen catching all the balls, he's clearly just the running down back. I don't know that I would go chasing him again, but if he falls in my lap, might take a chance on him, maybe in some of the later rounds. But we know that his receptions are not going to improve, period. As long as Tariq Cohen's back there, they're not going to go up. So he's more of a later round flyer to me.
Yeah, it could be incremental. The problem is, though, with the volume. You like to think, I'll take a flyer on him in the later round. But right now he's going in round 5.
Oof.
That's where he's going. He's the 25th running back off the board, which, makes sense, in theory. But you're getting that guy in round 5, and you're turning down some bigger upside guys. He's being drafted right around Devin Singletary, Mark Ingram, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert. And I think a lot of these guys have ceilings that are just a little bit different than David Montgomery right now, even though they may not have the guaranteed workload.
Yeah, in a round that late, or 5th round, I would probably take the ceiling, because by then you've already taken your heavy hitter running backs, your heavy hitter wide receivers. So there's a lot better options out there in round 5 than to pick somebody who's not going to have the upside for sure.
Yeah, and I think this, it's a good time to bring in roster construction and strategy, right? If I've gotten some high risk, high ceiling guys, I might be looking at Montgomery as that guy. Hey, I know he's going to touch the ball 15 plus times every single game and get what he gets. But if I have those really steady Eddie guys, then I might be looking for some home run, bigger ceiling guys around, round 5. So I think it does depend a lot on your roster construction. Tariq Cohen, we usually go through this show in half-point PPR as far as what we kind of base it off of. But certainly we understand that people play standard, people play full PPR. Tariq Cohen is one of the perfect examples of a guy that has remarkably different value in each one of those, scoring setups, right? So 104 targets in full point PPR. Is that a guy, someone has to draft and have on their bench?
Yeah, personally, I like to stay away from the Tyreek Cohens and the James Whites of the world, just because you're basically drafting a wide receiver that runs sometimes. Um, that's never been my niche. Some people like that, especially in PPR leagues. I don't like those kind of backs for me not to have on my team. Not saying that there's not value there if it falls into a later round, but yeah, I tend to stay away from those.
Yeah, and I think what happens with a guy like Cohen, I feel like, he's a good guy to have on your bench for PPR. He plays a flex when you need to, injury fill-in, but he's the kind of guy that can have those big games. So when he's on your bench, every week you're thinking about maybe playing him. He's in that conversation for flex every week in your mind because he could have that big game. 10 receptions, 90 yards and a touchdown is big for a running back, right? So, you always have that option. I really don't like having those guys on my bench that I feel like I don't ever want to play, but I think about playing them every week, it just bothers me overall. So, all right, let's go to the wideouts here. So we have Allen Robinson as the clear-cut number one. It's not a question here. Another 154 targets last year, 1,150 yards, 7 touchdowns. There's no reason to think, 154 targets might not be quite that many, but even if it's 140 or so, with the volume there is there any reason to, not like Allen Robinson other than the team he's on and the quarterback he has?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with Foles coming in too. Allen Robinson found a way to break 1,000 yards with Mitchell Trubisky under center. So that's definitely interesting. I like his talent. I like what he does. 7 touchdowns, like you mentioned. Even if the targets dissipate a little bit, which I don't think they will if Foles steps in, but I still like Robinson a lot. He's probably the only person on this whole team that I would even consider going for.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing for me always with Allen Robinson is that I never like the feeling of thinking he's my number one wide receiver, even though he was, wide receiver 11 last year. He's right now being drafted as the number 9 wide receiver. And like I said, he's done it with Mitch Trubisky. He did it with Blake Bortles. He was great with Blake Bortles, So you like to think if Foles comes in, his value goes up maybe even a little bit incrementally. And as much as I like him and will have him ranked around number 12, I'm not drafting him. I know I'm not drafting him. It's guaranteed. I'm not freaking drafting Allen Robinson, even though my brain knows he's going to have 1,000 yards, and 6+ touchdowns.
Right. He just doesn't sound like a wide receiver 1. I get what you're saying. Like, even though the numbers are there and that the potential is there, I feel you. I mean, it's not somebody else even in that same realm that you would take him over anybody else in the same spot.
Yeah. So if I go running back at like number 5 or so, you know what I mean, or number 4, and then it comes back and I'm at pick number 20, I'm not drafting Allen freaking Robinson. It's just not happening. So, I don't know what it is. There's some kind of mental block going on with me and Allen Robinson. It just won't happen.
I mean, we all have our undraftable players in our own heads, so that makes sense. I mean,
yeah. All right, so maybe bigger question here is who is number 2, and does it matter? So we're looking at guys like Anthony Miller, Riley Ridley in his second year, and then also Ted Ginn, who was brought in from New Orleans. Anthony Miller has been, pretty much the number 2 here for a couple of years now. He's had the touchdowns in previous years. Didn't have them last year, but had a decent season. Do you see Anthony Miller as the number 2 here, or is Riley Ridley ready to make that step?
I still see Anthony Miller as number 2 for sure. I mean, even though the touchdowns were a little bit low, his yardage was good, his receptions were good, and that's even in a Chicago offense that was terrible. Is he on my radar? Absolutely not. But as far as the team goes, I mean, Anthony Miller is probably going to be the wide receiver 2. And he could step up, but again, if you're already off on drafting Allen Robinson, then you definitely don't want to draft Anthony Miller.
Yeah, no. If he kept the touchdowns, if it was another one of those seasons where he had 45 catches but 8 touchdowns, I'd probably be more on him than getting more volume. But yeah, just because I hate this team, I hate this offense, I don't want any part. Honestly, I really don't. Sick of I'm just over the Bears, and this next segment will show you exactly why. Because now we're going into tight ends, and so they overpay Trey Burton for nothing, and then let him go. Now he's gone. So what's the next obvious step? Overpay for Jimmy Graham. Bring him in for $8 million a year. Makes no sense. You make $2 more million and got Austin Hooper nearing the prime of his career than Jimmy Graham. But you bring Jimmy Graham in. You also bring in Demetrius Harris as a tight end for whatever reason. Then, oh yeah, you only have a couple of draft picks this year because you gave them all away to get Khalil Mack. So what do you do with your first one in the second round? Yeah, you get another tight end. Of course. Why wouldn't you? Makes total perfect sense. And now they have the busiest tight end room in all of football. They've got like 10 tight ends on the roster right now. And I just don't make any sense of it in my brain. So, I mean, Jimmy Graham will obviously be the number one tight end here. Does that matter at all?
No, not at all. I mean, Jimmy Graham last year was just a shell of himself of his former years, and I don't see him making a quick turnaround at all, especially with the crowded tight end room. I mean, they can make a whole offensive line out of their tight ends. I mean, they have like 10 of them. So,
yeah, and that's kind of Aaron Rodgers, not Mitchell Trubisky, also, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You look good with Aaron Rodgers. You're not going to look any better with Mitch Trubisky throwing you the ball.
Yeah. I think if they spend that early of a draft pick on a tight end, no, rookie tight ends don't really make a big impact on fantasy, but I don't think they spent that early of a pick to not start them in some form. So when you throw that out along with Jimmy Graham, like there's no value anywhere over there. So.
Yeah, there's nothing going on in Chicago that I want. You keep it. I'm from Brooklyn, so first of all, you can keep your pizza, whatever cake you make in Chicago, whatever that crap is. Don't even call it pizza. It's offensive to people that like pizza. Second of all, you can keep your Bears too. They suck too. All right. Sorry, rant over. All right, let's move on to the Detroit Lions, the almost perennial bottom dwellers here. Interesting team just because of the injuries last year and what was going on before the injuries, and then where things wound up, right? So they didn't change that much this year. They let their pass catching back go, Jared McKissick. That was a lot of targets. I mean, he had 50, 60 something targets. There's a good amount of targets in the backfield that are gone. They also let Jermaine Kearse go, which is not a big thing there, not a lot of targets. They bring in Geronimo Allison. To me, that's a wash. Kearse is gone. Allison's in. That's a wash. They do draft DeAndre Swift. I think one of the best draft moves that were made. A lot of people thought he was the top running back in this draft class and could be a difference maker. So to get him in the second round, pretty awesome for them. Not awesome for Kerryon Johnson, but we'll get there. So let's start with Matt Stafford. Played the first half of the season last year. In that first half was number 4 in points per game as a quarterback and was on pace for 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. I will take that, every day of the week on my fantasy team. And the fact is, you'll be able to get Stafford if you want him. If you like Matt Stafford and you think he's going to approach these numbers this year, you'll be able to draft him late in the draft. You'll get him there, not last round or something like that, but you'll get him there. So what are we looking at here? Do you think Matt Stafford is this guy, 4,500 yards, 35 TDs, or is that just an anomaly of a start that you can't expect to roll through this whole season?
No, it's not an anomaly at all. I mean, he has 6 4,000-yard seasons. He has 1 5,000-yard season. I still think he's got it in him. If he can stay healthy, like I said, he was on pace for another 5,000-yard season last year. Having Kenny Golladay on his side is another good thing. Like you said, Stafford's going to be available in the later rounds because I don't think people are distracted with the high-end, flashy quarterbacks. This is a sneaky pick. I really like Stafford this year for sure, especially where you're getting them at.
Exactly. I won't be surprised. I won't be thrilled, but I won't be surprised if he's on a few of my teams. And it'll be one of those things where, right after the draft, I'll have a little bit of remorse, but I'll also be optimistic. I won't really be sure what I feel. But I'll be surprised if I don't have him on a roster or two. Because, again, the upside. Who else are you drafting in the 10th round that could get 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns? I don't see anybody there. It's not even a possibility for most of those guys, So I like it there. Let's go to the backfield here. We mentioned DeAndre Swift drafted early in the second round. Now, Kerryon Johnson was their highly touted running back they drafted a couple of years ago, has shown flashes of the talent, but has had trouble staying on the field and fulfilling that talent. Missed the last half of the season last year. In the first half, only ran for 3.6 yards per carry. Very disappointing there. Do you think he's going to hang on to a starting job to start the season? Do you think it's a 1A, 1B? Or do you think Swift, with the draft capital and the talent, comes in and becomes the number 1?
I think day one, Kerryon Johnson's still going to have the 1A start, even with his 3.6 average. And he was a huge letdown last year. A lot of people were really high on him. Obviously, he let people down, but I just don't see DeAndre Swift coming in day one and just taking all the carries. Will he get there eventually? Yeah, probably. I think he's a lot more talented, but just to start the season, I don't see DeAndre Swift going. But he could erupt into something really special. I like him a lot. I think he was the number one draft prospect for me as far as running backs go, even though he wasn't taken there. But I like DeAndre Swift a lot.
Well, I got to tell you, so one of the things I'm looking at with Swift, and part of the reason why I'm on the fence is I mentioned Jared McKissick, right? And so in the 8 games that Kerryon Johnson played, he had 15 targets. Very minimal, right? Not a pass catching back. At least that's not how they were using him. And then McKissick had, an abundance of targets. So if they're going to plan on, first starting DeAndre Swift into that, because he's an excellent pass catching back, DeAndre Swift is fantastic in that skill set. So I can see a path where that's how he starts in as the third down back, pass catching back, and then the talent takes over, week 5, 6, 7, and he becomes slowly that 1A. The question is, where do you value that? And for fantasy players, can you wait 5, 6, 7 weeks, depending on where you draft him, to wait for him to take over? Right now, he's being drafted ahead of Kerryon Johnson. So where would you feel comfortable taking, DeAndre Swift this year in his rookie season? Is he the one to draft, or is it Kerryon Johnson for the better value as he falls down the ADP list?
As much as I like Swift, unfortunately, I'm not one to play the waiting game. Just for now, I think it is funny that he's being drafted above Kerryon Johnson at the moment, and that's probably people that are going to wait for that talent to arise. But for me, I don't want to wait 6, 7 weeks for that to come to fruition. So I will avoid it for this year. I mean, both those backs to me don't really have a whole lot of value this year, but we will see.
Yeah, and it's tough because Swift is really rising fast. I mean, right now his ADP is around number 58. That puts him in the back end of the 5th round, which means he's a starter on your team. I mean, 5th round guy, you should be expected to have in your lineup most weeks unless something happens. I'm not comfortable with that yet unless I hear something out of the coaches or in preseason that says, yes, he is, the featured back in this backfield. I definitely can't go round 5 on him. I mean, that seems crazy. And he's rising. So that means he'll probably go even higher into the 5th and could even sneak into the back 4th before the season starts. To me, that's craziness.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at Kerryon Johnson, and he's an 8th round guy and very minimal risk. So I think not that I want Kerryon Johnson, but if I'm picking between the two, I'd rather have Kerryon in the 8th.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the wideouts here. Kenny Golladay, man, great season for Kenny G. Was able to do it with the giant mix of quarterbacks, right? We had Stafford, then we had Driscoll, then we had Bleh, and you didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah, so there were some games where he didn't get a lot of targets, where he had one big play, made a monstrous play. At the end of the day, led the league in touchdowns, 11 touchdowns. The guy knows how to win those 50-50 balls in the end zone. He knows how to find the end zone. And I'm looking at him as a guy that's going to be drafted as a back-end wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. And I don't see many other guys in that range that could be top 3. And for me, Golladay, absolutely. There's no reason to think he could not be a top 3 guy with 90 receptions, 1,300 plus yards, and 12 plus touchdowns.
Absolutely. I mean, last year, Stafford only started 8 games, like I said, and he had a myriad of quarterbacks. If you keep Stafford's talent on the field with the amount he passes at a 5,000-yard rate, you take Galladay's numbers last year, which were 65 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, and 11 touchdowns. 11 touchdowns was first in the league. And that was with mediocre to average quarterback play. So if Stafford stays on the field, Golladay could very easily catapult into the top 3. I mean, Stafford loves to have a huge yardage wide receiver. I mean, we remember Megatron, but I don't see him doing that far. But I'm saying he likes to have a good target like that, and he could very easily be in the tier 1s for sure. Could be a shocker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see a guy like him, and I think he could overtake a Chris Godwin or a Tyreek Hill this year for a couple of different reasons. Not to say those guys aren't going to be great, just kind of picking little minutia here between these top guys, and how well they're going to do. But I just see the path to Golladay being elite clearer than some of these other guys, just because of the talent around them. So let's move to Marvin Jones. I mentioned earlier, I think the most criminally underrated, fantasy player probably in the last 5 years. A guy that has performed every year when he's on the field. He not only catches the ball, he scores touchdowns. He's just consistent, and he's a great wide receiver and never gets his due. So he was the number 27 wide receiver in only 13 games last year. So essentially he was a wide receiver 2, as far as the points per game go. But I guarantee he's not being drafted anywhere near that. I'm going to pull it up right now. But let me tell you, what do you think about Marvin Jones? Have you had him on your teams? Is he someone that you target, or have you been another one of those people that just kind of always let him go?
I think there's been a couple of years where I actually picked him up off waiver wire, and I liked having him there. Like I said, he's pretty underrated. I mean, he had 9 touchdowns last year again, almost 800 yards, 62. So even if he's not a wide receiver 2, if you can snag him, because I'm sure whatever value you're about to pull up is probably super low. If you can snag him even later rounds and put him on your bench, then, I mean, who knows what happens to Galladay? I mean, maybe he goes down and all of a sudden he's the dude that's catching balls from a quarterback that throws for 5,000 yards. So, yeah,
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I see the Jones ceiling as being a high-end wide receiver 2 in that, 12 to 15 range. And that's on the high end. But it's hard for you to imagine him outside of wide receiver 2. Right now, he's the wide receiver 36 going off the board, and that's in the 9th round. So that's what I just don't get it. He's just one of those guys every year in and year out. He's just shockingly low on the ADP list. And I think it's because, as I mentioned before, you never know if you want to play him or not. He's on your bench every week, and every week you think about playing him, and you look at him and the other guy, and you look at him and, and then you don't play him, and then he has another good week, and he's just in that conversation every week, so it's hard to have him on your roster. I will have Marvin Jones on many teams this year. I didn't have him last year at all, and, I knew that was the wrong move, and I'll have him a lot this year if he stays anywhere near the 8th or 9th round. He'll be on my teams. Him and Deontay Johnson. Those are my 2. Deontay Johnson and Marvin Jones will be on my teams, and that's why I'm going to be drafting running backs early, heavy this year, just because of all those guys in the 6th, 7th, 8th round that are wide receivers that can have monster years.
Yeah, there's a ton of wide receiver 2, 3 options this year, like a ton. So.
Yep, and finding the one, because some of them are going to elevate, and some of them are going to blow up, right? You're going to pick the right ones. Let's just talk about Amendola for a second, because he's still there. He's the number 3. Probably not much value outside of PPR, but is he someone that should be drafted in PPR or just play the free agent wire?
Play free agent wire on him. I mean, he had 62 receptions, which ironically was the exact same as Marvin Jones did. Only 1 touchdown, a little bit less yards than Marvin Jones. I think that might have something to do with checkdowns of poor quarterback play than anything. He's just the next option out the slot. I mean, just dump it off. And I think that's where most of his value came in last year. I don't see that repeating at all.
It's crazy when you see the roles they play, right? Because you mentioned Amendola and Jones have the same amount of receptions, 62. Galladay only had 3 more, 65. Mm-hmm. But they go from 678 yards and 1 touchdown to 779 and 9 up to 1,211 with almost the same receptions. It's pretty wild when you see that that role that they play in that offense. Yeah, I'm all over Galladay and Marvin Jones this year. I freaking sick to my stomach to say I'm all over Detroit Lions. But it happens that way sometimes,
It's the thing about Detroit. I mean, they've never won the NFC North, but there's always somebody in Detroit that you want to pick up. So.
All right, well, we're just about done here with Detroit and with our episode, but I do want to bring up T.J. Hawkinson, one of the more talked about tight end rookie prospects in the last few years. He was drafted extremely highly. I think he was a top 10 draft pick, maybe number 8, I believe, out of Iowa, maybe. And had a great debut to his NFL, career, and then really never repeated that performance for the rest of the season. Is he a sneaky tight end draft for you, or is he a stay away
guy? This was a tough one. I mean, rookie tight ends never make an impact at all. Some do take the next step up the next year, though. Like I said, his first game, 6 receptions, over 100 yards, a touchdown. And everyone was like, oh, man, this is going to be the next dude. Kind of fell off after that. And they throw Jesse James in there, too. He didn't really do a whole lot either. But I mean, his only upside is if Stafford stays on the field, but that's not something I'm going to bet on. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if Stafford's on the field, it's a question mark how valuable he'll be. Stafford just last year he was back to launching the ball more than any other year I remember in the last few years. More deep passes over 20, 30 yards in the air than before. And I just see him checking down to Amendola and the tight end much less. I think it'll be running backs if and when you get the check down now with the added talent. Again, bring in, DeAndre Swift. I think that's a big reason why you'll see Hockenson not have a big step forward because of such a talented pass-catching running back coming onto the team. I think that'll dig into that a little bit. But, I'm not drafting Hockenson either, so we'll leave it at that. I think it was funny last year how many people played him in week 2, 3, and 4 off of that week 1 and got like 2 combined points. Pretty brutal, man, but it happens. You can't chase the points. You got to play the matchups. Let him prove it. One game, one big game does not make a fantasy start.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody chase the points from one game. Who was it? Even on the Chiefs, was it McCall Hardman or who else is on the Chiefs?
Demarcus Robinson, didn't he have a big...
Demarcus Robinson had like a sick game, one game last year, and then everyone ran to the waiver wire to get him, and then he didn't do shit after that.
Week 1, he had 150 and 3 touchdowns. I don't think he was on the free agent wire, but everyone that had him benched played him for the next few weeks and got nothing out of him.
Yeah.
That's what happens, man. So, all right, dude, that's going to do it for the NFC North. Gage, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming back on the show and helping us out with this. Appreciate your time, man. Hopefully we get to see you back soon. You down for coming down and do another episode?
Yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy the time, man.
All right, well, we appreciate that. We'll be in touch with you about that. We're looking forward to maybe getting a mock draft going soon with some other people, doing a nice live, fun mock draft. And I'll be in touch with you about that. But just want to thank you again, and we all hope you stay safe and take care.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Yeah, man. Take it easy. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thanks a lot again, Mr. Gage Scott. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. So that was the NFC North. We've now got the East and the North already done in the can, as they say. Moving on to the rest of the NFC here shortly. So keep a lookout for those videos. Make sure you go ahead and please like, share, and subscribe to the channel as always. Also, go ahead and find us on Twitter. You can tweet the show at GOATFF Podcast. You can also tweet me directly at Jim Neander. Go ahead and drop us a line if you have any questions about the episode or any questions about your lineups or upcoming drafts. That's what we're here for. We're all here to help you get better, help your team win a championship, baby. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Take care. See you next time.